Heads up.
That's very true.
We all here?
Kevin's going to join us.
I think he'll be there.
Who's coming?
Kevin's coming, but he'll be
Okay. Well, glad you all are here. We want to talk about House Resolution 1, just in case there's not enough discussion going on about that on the other side of the building. I was the Secretary of State in Missouri, which is the chief election official. I was a local election official before that. So for 20 years, part of my daily responsibilities every day was to run elections and to pay attention to elections, and I continued to do that even here. I will say that it appears to me that in House Resolution 1, there are no new ideas. Sort of every idea that Democrats have advanced for about the last 20 years, including every idea that they have challenged in court, taken to court, tried to get done that way if they couldn't get it done any other way. Every attempt to put the federal government in control of elections. And frankly, I think one of the great strengths of our system is the diversity of the system and the fact that the people who are in control of elections, of administering elections, are highly answerable to the people that they see every day. As 8 years as a chief state election official, 12 years doing that other job, I don't know of anything I ever took more seriously than being sure that when people left the polling place and when people heard the results, they had absolute confidence that that's what happened on Election Day. I don't think that would happen if you remove that connection between local responsibility and what happens on Election Day. The other thing we need to think about when we look at these issues is if the federal government begins to give lots of direction, is the federal government going to give lots of money? And when the federal government gives lots of money, the federal government always gives lots of control. This may be a place where the federal government is arguing in this bill, we need to have lots of control, but you've got to come up, state and local governments, with lots of money to do whatever it is we think is the best thing to do in your jurisdiction. So we want to talk about that a little bit today. The House Rules Committee would have some jurisdiction here on elections and looking at the results of elections. House Administration has jurisdiction in the House, and Rodney Davis is the top Republican on that committee.
Thank you, Senator Blunt, and it's great to have a former Secretary of State, former election administrator up at the dais to talk about the impact that it can have on our local election officials. And just to be clear, this process that got H.R. 1 to the floor today was nowhere near a bipartisan and open and transparent process. The Democrats, when they took the majority, said they wanted to be more bipartisan. They wanted more openness, and they wanted to get back to regular order. This process that got us to the floor was nowhere near that. As a matter of fact, 10 committees of jurisdiction 10 committees have jurisdiction over this bill. 5 committees held hearings. 1 committee, the smallest committee in the House of Representatives, the House Administration Committee, marked this bill up. We were promised by the chairperson during that markup that the other committees of jurisdiction would be able to mark up their portions of the bill. They weren't allowed to do that, and this bill is being pushed on us. It's being pushed on us because this is the Democrats' #1 priority. And it's not about just getting people registered. It's not about making sure everybody can cast their vote and that vote is protected. We all share the values of making those things happen. But what this bill is a Democrat push to elect more Democrats and to put money into the pockets of members of Congress and anyone running for election. This bill, because it was only marked up in our committee, has not been vetted through the others, and therefore the provisions in place that have now changed seemingly overnight still result in the same thing. It results in millions upon millions of dollars going to congressional candidates under the guise of campaign finance reform. I have not met anyone in my district or anywhere else in this country that has said the key to reforming our campaign finance system is to put more money in the campaigns of members of Congress. That's exactly what the 6-to-1 match program does, and make no bones about it. No matter how they move a shell game around to try and say they're funding it through some other source, the cost will be borne as another mandatory spending program in Washington. The cost will be borne on the taxpayers of this country. And every vote should be counted. Every vote should be protected. And H.R. 1 clearly does not accomplish those goals. I'd like to introduce our House Republican Conference Chair, the Honorable and good friend Liz Cheney.
Thank you very much. We have seen now over the course of the 2 months that the Democrats have been in the majority in the House, a very clear agenda. Their agenda is to strip power away from the people and to enhance the power and authority of the federal government in Washington, D.C. They tell you they're for the people, but again and again and again, we see them pursuing different programs, whether it is this one, H.R. 1, whether it's their effort to take over the healthcare system in the nation. Across the board, you've seen them attempt to take power from the people and give it to the federal government. This is yet one more example of that. And in this instance, they're trying to empower the federal government to control what all of us can say from a political perspective. They're trying to empower the federal government with a very partisan makeup of the Federal Election Commission, going from the 3-to-3 breakdown that we have now to the 3-to-2 breakdown, to control what we can say. So when we look at what's at stake here, fundamentally, our election laws are at stake. Fundamentally, how we affect our elections, how we're able to participate in those elections, they're being skewed in a way that not only would favor the Democrats, but would empower the state. And we in the House Republican Conference will absolutely stand against that, no matter what the subject is. They say they're for the people, but they're for the politicians and they're for the state. And we know Republicans stand for the kind of individual freedoms that are enshrined in the Constitution. Freedom of speech is at the top of that list. We will not support this legislation. We will make sure that everybody across this country understands fundamentally what it is and what it would do to our ability to participate in our electoral process. And with that, I'd like to introduce our House Whip, our House Minority Whip, Mr. Steve Scalise.
Thank you, Liz. We have a choice between freedom and socialism in this country right now. And if you look at the hard left shift that Nancy Pelosi has taken since she's been Speaker, just look at the last 2 weeks. Last week, they brought a bill to infringe upon the Second Amendment rights of Americans. And they passed that bill with strong Republican opposition. This week, they're bringing a bill that would infringe against the First Amendment rights of American citizens. In fact, Speaker Pelosi has managed to somehow unify groups that you might not think of in the same sentence. The ACLU and National Right to Life have all come out strongly against this bill because of what it would do to take away the First Amendment rights of American citizens. And not only that, it would funnel billions of dollars into political accounts. It should be called For the Politicians Act, because that's what it would do. In fact, you can't even find out how much this will cost the taxpayers of the country because they haven't even put a formal score to it. Many estimates that it will be billions of dollars of taxpayer money that will go into political campaign accounts. I don't think that that's what Americans want us to be doing in Washington. I don't think that that's what Nancy Pelosi said she would do when she pushed to become Speaker and get this majority, but yet that's what they're doing with this bill. Some of the other things that this bill does that are dangerous for people all across the country that want fair elections. We want everybody who's legally eligible to vote to have the opportunity to vote. But in many cases, they would undermine the voter protection laws that states have to ensure that only people who are legally allowed to vote can vote one time. In fact, under this bill, you could have people who are here in this country illegally forced onto voter rolls of some states, and if the state tries to remove those people that are here illegally, the state would be in violation of this law. They actually allow in this bill people who went to federal prison for voter fraud to be able to vote in federal elections. Now, nobody's been able to explain how if you're having an election in your state and you have both federal, state, and local elections all on the same ballot, but only on the federal elections can those felons who were convicted of voter fraud be eligible to vote. How does the state even conduct a fair election in that place? Those are some of the bad provisions of this bill, and it continues to get worse as they bring scores of amendments. Nobody knows what the final bill is going to look like, but we already know how bad it will be to undermine the voting rights of so many millions of people and what it would do to funnel billions of taxpayer dollars into political campaign accounts. This is bad legislation for people who want the ability to speak freely and vote fairly in elections. And now I'd like to bring up the majority leader of the Senate, Leader McConnell.
Well, for quite a while I've been involved in the debates we've had over campaign finance reform. Just to refresh some of the newcomers' memory, I was the plaintiff against McCain-Feingold. I had, even though I was not a party, I had oral argument time in Citizens United. This is an issue that I've dealt with for decades, including for a period of time as a part-time college professor teaching a course in this, in addition to being obviously in politics now for quite some time. This bill is a target-rich environment, as all of our colleagues have pointed out to you, but I would give you some of the highlights that I think are particularly offensive to average voters. Number one, using government money to subsidize campaigns. In effect, money collected from all of us, either in taxes or fees or fines, and given in effect to candidates to finance campaigns that we may not agree with. So they're taking government money and underwriting candidates that we disagree with. You've heard for quite a while now, Democrats always claim there's no election fraud in America. I would refer you to the recent North Carolina House election, just set aside in North Carolina because of election fraud. The reason it was set aside is because of something called ballot harvesting, which is illegal in North Carolina, but is legal in California. And as the members of the House would probably tell you, is widely thought that ballot harvesting, legal in California, is the reason there are only 7 Republicans left in the delegation from California. Ballot harvesting, mysteriously, is not a part of this parade of horribles, somehow overlooked in all of this. Another point I would emphasize is the Federal Election Commission has been 3-3 since the post-Watergate period. This was a period during which Democrats had massive majorities in the House and Senate, could have done anything they wanted to, but it never occurred to them that the Federal Election Commission, to administer the law, would be done on a partisan basis. So the FEC has been 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans for all of these years to prevent either side from taking partisan advantage of the other. Well, in H.R. 1, it's no longer dead even. The party of the president will have a majority on the FEC and thereby further able to terrorize and intimidate the opposition with impunity. So, this is a terrible proposal. It will not get any floor time in the Senate, but it is important to understand what they're trying to do here. And I think our colleagues in the House have done a great job in educating the members of the House as to what's involved with this. Finally, let me suggest that I believe we can actually win elections against people who vote for this turkey. Taxpayer funding of elections, partisan takeover of the FEC, and no real concern about the only obvious election fraud we had in the last election as a result of ballot harvesting. I'd be happy to take a couple of questions if there are any. Yeah.
Leader McConnell, the Democrats in the House have said that they want to get through this package as kind of an omnibus first, and then they consider breaking it up into smaller pieces where they might be able to find bipartisan support. Are there any parts of the bill that you like? And then either for you or Mr. Scalise, a lot of Democrats in the House actually ran on some of the items in this bill, so why do you think that?
I'd be open to a discussion about eliminating ballot harvesting. An obvious example of voter fraud, which they've been arguing doesn't exist in America. Beyond that, for myself, I don't see anything in here salvageable. What is the problem that we're trying to solve here? We had the highest turnout last year since 1966 in an off-year election. People are flooding to the polls. They're flooding to the polls because they're animated. They're interested. And this is a solution in search of a problem. What it really is a bill designed to make it more likely Democrats win more often. Nothing else. So if they want to talk about getting rid of ballot harvesting, I'd be open to that. Beyond that, I don't think anything in here is salvageable. Yeah.
McConnell, forgive me an off-topic question, but one of your members, Martha McSally, was just in an open hearing and said that she had been sexually assaulted during her time in the military. I'm wondering what your reaction is to hearing her decision to speak out in that way, and whether you think there's any other policy prescription.
Well, these kind of things that have occurred in people's lives are terrible. Joni Ernst had some comments about that earlier in the year. Whatever policy prescriptions Senator McSally or Senator Ernst may come up with, we'd certainly be open to. We just passed, on a bipartisan basis, at the end of the last Congress, through both the House and the Senate, sexual harassment changes for Congress that were dealt with by Senator Blunt and Senator Klobuchar. This is obviously a big problem, and if we can find a further way to address it, we should.
Leader McConnell. One of the provisions in H.R. 1 requires that presidential and vice presidential candidates release 10 years of their tax returns. Is that something that you would support?
Look, they're presenting this as a package. If they decide to start splitting it up, I've indicated where I think we ought to start. We ought to get rid of ballot harvesting everywhere in America to deal with election fraud, which they claim is non-existent. If they send us other individual pieces of legislation, we'll be happy to take a look at it. Yeah.
Democrats say they're making Election Day a federal holiday in order to incentivize businesses to make it also a holiday and bring out people to the polls. Why is incentivizing people to vote?
Well, what is the problem? We had the biggest election turnout since 1966 last year. If the idea here is to make it more likely we have a higher turnout, it seems to me that's happening. What affects turnout more than anything else is interest and competition. Spending in races, for example, the more money that's spent in a race, the higher the turnout. The less money is spent, the lower the turnout. We got a lot of federal holidays in America. I personally don't see any point in having any more. Yeah.
Obviously, you're opposed to H.R. 1. You're also opposed to the Green New Deal. Why is the Green New Deal getting a vote in the Senate when H.R. 1 is not?
Because I get to decide what we vote on. Yeah.
One of the amendments to H.R. 1 would lower the voting age to 16 years old.
It took a constitutional amendment to lower the voting age to 18. And I believe in the 1970s they thought it took a constitutional amendment because the Constitution largely gives to the states the issue of how you qualify for voting. So my reaction to that is, wouldn't it take a constitutional amendment like it did to lower the voting age to 18? Otherwise, I think the Constitution is pretty clear that this is the kind of thing states decide. Actually, prior to the constitutional amendment lowering the voting age to 18, there were 2 states in America that had a voting age lower than 21. Kentucky was one of them at 18. Georgia was the other at 19. So I think the feeling was it took a constitutional amendment to set that kind of standard. I'm going to take one more and then I see. Yeah.
I wanted to ask Congressman Scalise a question.
Yeah, Steve.
Sure, thanks.
Many of the Democrats that flipped seats ran on this type of a bill, and they are, in fact, celebrating the fact that it's on the floor. How do you respond? Senator McConnell said he'd like to run against them in 2020. They ran on this in 2018 and won.
Well, let's keep in mind, first of all, there are some Democrats who ran on a proposal to raise taxes, and they're proposing many things, and they ought to bring those bills up for a vote. Because we've seen how cutting taxes has gotten our economy back on track, and if they want to go on record being for more government control and digging into your pockets even deeper, then we ought to have that debate. As far as the Green New Deal, many ran on that issue. Frankly, there are a lot of other Democrats who flipped seats from Republican and Democrat that are scared to death to vote on it, and I share Senator McConnell's feelings is that we ought to have a vote on that too and fully debate it. But if you look at this bill, let's keep in mind a lot of the seats that were flipped from Republican to Democrat were won by people who ran saying they were going to be pro-life and pro-gun. Many of them already now have an F rating with the National Rifle Association and have voted for more gun control. By this Friday, they will have an opportunity to vote on a bill that, if they vote yes, will get them an F rating with National Right to Life. It's going to be real hard to go back home and say you're pro-life and pro-gun when you have an F rating with National Right to Life and an F rating with the National Rifle Association.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Good answer.